The house on Elm Street loomed in front of Ella like a great, slumbering beast. It was a relic of another era, its Victorian turrets piercing the sky with the grace of a bygone age, yet its peeling paint and boarded windows gave it an unsettling appearance, as though it had grown weary of standing guard over the street for so many years. Ella stood on the cracked pavement, clutching her backpack, staring up at the shadowed facade. Something about it made her skin crawl, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "Come on, Ella. It's just a house," her father said, voice strained with the enthusiasm of someone trying to convince himself more than anyone else. He hoisted another box out of the trunk and made his way toward the porch, the boards creaking under his weight. Her mother, already busy inside, was bustling around, turning this forgotten relic into their new home. Just a house, Ella thought, glancing toward the basement window at the side of the house. It was the only one completely shrouded in darkness, even in the midday sun. There was a thickness to that shadow, a kind of darkness that seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. A chill ran down her spine as she looked away, focusing on the front door instead. Inside, the house felt even larger, the ceilings towering above them, their plaster cracking in intricate spiderweb patterns. Every step echoed through the empty rooms, each sound amplified by the hollow spaces. The air was stale, carrying the scent of old wood and dust. Despite the warmth outside, it was cold in here, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. "Ella, why don't you go pick out your room?" her mother called from the kitchen, where she was wrestling with a stuck window. "Just stay out of the basement, okay? It's not safe." Ella nodded absently, already moving toward the grand staircase that spiraled upward. As she climbed, her fingers brushed the banister, feeling the grooves and nicks that marked its age. It was solid wood, worn smooth by the touch of countless hands over the decades. She could almost imagine those hands, small, large, some delicate, others rough. People who had lived here before, each leaving behind a trace of themselves. The hallway upstairs was long, with several doors on either side, most of them closed. As she walked past them, she felt an inexplicable urge to peek inside each one, as if expecting to find something or someone waiting for her. She resisted, moving toward the end of the hall where the largest room awaited. It was spacious, with a wide window overlooking the front yard and the street beyond. Sunlight streamed in, catching motes of dust in its beam. For a moment, Ella felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this place wasn't so bad. It was just old, that was all. Old things creaked and groaned. They had their own quirks. But then she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from behind her, from the darkened hallway she had just walked through. She turned quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. There was nothing there, just the long stretch of corridor and the closed doors. "Ella, are you all right?" her mother called from downstairs. "Yeah," she replied, forcing her voice to sound normal. "Just exploring." She moved away from the hallway and began unpacking, trying to push the unsettling feeling out of her mind. Yet, every time she glanced at the doorway, she felt as if something was just beyond the threshold, watching. Days passed, and the house began to fill with their belongings, slowly shedding its aura of abandonment. The rooms took on life again, with furniture and the clutter of daily living. Yet the basement remained untouched, its door at the far end of the kitchen an ever-present reminder of what lay beneath them. Her parents kept it locked, warning Ella that it was unsafe because of its steep stairs and moldy walls. But it wasn't the danger of falling that scared her. It was the sense of something waiting down there. At night, the house changed. It came alive with sounds, creaks, groans, and the occasional soft thud that echoed through the walls. Her parents dismissed them as the house settling, the noises of an old structure adjusting to their presence. But Ella knew better. The sounds were too deliberate, too purposeful. like the one night when she woke to hear a soft scraping noise, as if something was dragging itself across the floor. It came from the direction of the kitchen, from the basement door. She lay in bed, holding her breath, straining to hear more. The sound came again, closer this time, like nails scratching against wood. She wanted to scream, to wake her parents, but she was paralyzed by fear. In the dim light filtering through her curtains, she saw the shadows shifting on her bedroom wall. They moved slowly, crawling upwards, morphing into shapes that made her heart race. One shadow in particular stretched longer than the rest, its form almost human, yet distorted, as if it were trying to claw its way out of the floor. Then it stopped. The house fell silent and the shadows receded, leaving Ella trembling under her covers. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to believe it was just a nightmare, a figment of her overactive imagination. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The house was alive, and it was watching her. The next morning, she found muddy footprints leading from the kitchen to the basement door. They were faint, almost as if they had been wiped away, but they were there. Her parents hadn't noticed them, or if they had, they didn't say anything. Ella stared at them, her pulse quickening. The prints were small, like a child's. "Who would go into the basement?" she asked at breakfast, her voice shaking slightly. "No one," her father replied without looking up from his newspaper. "The door is locked. You know that, Ella." She didn't argue. There was no point. The lock on the basement door had a mind of its own. Sometimes it was there, rusty and stubborn. Other times it vanished as if it had never existed. Ella started avoiding the kitchen altogether, hurrying past it whenever she needed something. The basement door seemed to call to her, a constant whisper at the back of her mind. One evening, as the sky darkened and the house settled into its nocturnal creaks, Ella sat in her room, clutching a flashlight. She had made up her mind. She needed to know what was in the basement. She had to face whatever was lurking there, or it would consume her. The fear was eating away at her, filling her dreams with nightmares and turning the house into a prison. She crept out of her room, flashlight in hand, moving silently through the hallway. Her parents were asleep, their room door closed. As she descended the staircase, the air grew colder, each step amplifying the sound of her beating heart. When she reached the kitchen, she hesitated. The basement door stood there, slightly ajar. It was open. She swallowed hard, taking a step closer. The whispering started again, faint and elusive, like voices speaking just at the edge of hearing. She raised the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. Her hand shook as she pushed the door open wider, revealing the steep, narrow stairs leading down into the abyss. Cold air wafted up from below, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Ella took a deep breath and stepped forward, her foot hovering over the first step. Then something moved in the shadows at the bottom of the stairs, a slithering, undulating form that shifted and twisted, retreating into the darkness as the flashlight's beam fell upon it. Ella gasped and stumbled back, her flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. The door slammed shut in front of her, plunging her into darkness. She screamed, pounding on the door, but it held firm. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her, filling her ears with their maddening cadence. She fell to the floor, covering her ears, trying to block them out. The shadows moved in the dark, creeping closer, their forms stretching and twisting. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The door creaked open behind her and light spilled into the kitchen. Ella scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. Her parents stood there, staring at her with confused and worried expressions. "Ella, what are you doing?" her mother asked, rushing to her side. I heard something," Ella stammered, her voice trembling. "In the basement." Her parents exchanged a glance, one filled with concern and something else, fear. They led her back to her room, assuring her it was just her imagination, that the basement was locked and there was nothing to fear. But as her mother tucked her into bed, Ella saw it in her eyes. Her mother was lying. She was afraid, too. That night, Ella lay in the dark, her eyes fixed on the door. The house was silent, too silent. And in the silence, she heard the faintest of whispers coming from the basement below, promising that this was only the beginning. The dreams began shortly after Ella's encounter with the basement door. They were not dreams in the traditional sense. They were far too vivid, too real. Each night, as soon as she closed her eyes, she was pulled into the same cold, dark place. She found herself standing at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into an endless black void. And there, at the bottom, stood the figure. It was always the same. Tall and gaunt, its form was little more than a shadow, shifting and wavering as though made of smoke. Its face was a blur, an unsettling mass of darkness that seemed to writhe, as if something inside it was struggling to break free. It didn't move. It only watched her, waiting. She could feel its gaze like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. In the dream, she would always turn to flee, but the house would change around her. The walls would close in, the hallways stretching and bending, leading her back to the basement door every time. And the figure would still be there, standing at the bottom of the stairs, its eyes, if it had eyes, burning into her soul. Ella would wake with a start, drenched in sweat, the whispers from the dream still echoing in her ears. They were not words she understood, but they conveyed a sense of menace, a promise of something worse to come. Each morning she tried to shake off the lingering terror, but it clung to her like a shadow. Her parents grew more concerned. They noticed the dark circles under her eyes, her growing reluctance to be alone in the house. "It's just the stress of the move," her father said, though his voice lacked conviction. Her mother tried to soothe her with comforting words, but Ella could see the unease in her eyes. They couldn't hear the whispers. They didn't see the figure in the dark. They didn't understand. Days turned into weeks, and the house seemed to grow colder, even as summer bloomed outside. It was as though the walls absorbed warmth, leaving the rooms perpetually chilly. The air was heavy, pressing down on Ella with a tangible weight. Shadows in the house grew longer, darker, even in the midday sun. They crept along the floors and walls, stretching toward her, reaching out with clawed fingers that disappeared when she turned to look directly at them. The whispers no longer confined themselves to her dreams. Now they followed her through the house, low and insistent, like a chant just out of earshot. They seemed to come from the very walls, the floorboards, the air itself. She caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, fleeting, barely there. Once she thought she saw a reflection in the hallway mirror that didn't belong to her. A tall, dark figure standing behind her, gone in the blink of an eye. Ella knew what it was. It was the Guardian. She discovered its name during one of her dream episodes. In that dream, she was in the basement again, but this time it wasn't empty. The room was filled with people, ghostly figures, pale and hollow-eyed, their mouths moving in a silent chant. They surrounded the Guardian, their faces twisted in expressions of fear and reverence. As Ella watched, they turned their gaze to her, their eyes wide and pleading. "It's the Guardian," one of them whispered, the voice breaking through the silence like a crack of thunder. "It protects the house, but not you." The scene shifted, the figures dissolving into mist, leaving Ella alone with the Guardian. It loomed over her, its form growing until it blotted out everything else. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was frozen in place, her feet rooted to the ground. The Guardian reached out, its shadowy arm extending toward her, fingers curling around her neck. The touch was ice cold, seeping into her skin, turning her blood to ice. She woke up gasping, clutching her throat, convinced she could still feel the ghostly fingers lingering there. Ella began researching the house's history, desperate for answers. She combed through old newspapers and town records at the local library. The house on Elm Street was over a century old, its history marred by tragedy and whispers of dark rituals. There were rumors of a family, the original owners, who had delved into occult practices. They had sought protection, a way to guard their home from an unspecified evil that plagued the town at the time. They succeeded, but at a cost. They summoned a guardian, Ella read in one of the old newspaper clippings. The article was vague, full of speculation, but it mentioned strange occurrences and disappearances around the time the family lived there. It was meant to protect them, to keep the darkness at bay, but it turned on them. It became the darkness. The more she read, the clearer it became. The guardian was bound to the house, its protector, its jailer. It didn't care about the families who moved in. It didn't protect them. It fed on them. It thrived on their fear, drawing strength from their terror, keeping them trapped in the house's sinister embrace. And now it had set its sights on Ella. Back at home, the guardian's presence grew stronger. It no longer lingered at the edge of her vision. Now it stalked her openly. She would see it in the mirrors, in the reflections on windows, a shadow standing silently behind her. It never moved, never spoke, but its silence was more terrifying than any scream. At night, she felt it standing at the foot of her bed, watching her as she lay paralyzed with fear. The whispers became voices, clear and distinct. They called her name, coaxing her, taunting her. They spoke of the basement, of the secrets it held, of the truth she had to face. "Come," they urged, "come and see." The more she resisted, the more insistent they became, until they filled every corner of her mind, leaving her unable to think of anything else. Her parents noticed her distress but were powerless to help. They argued more often, the tension in the house thickening with each passing day. Her mother's nerves were frayed, her father's patience thin. They tried to comfort Ella, but their words rang hollow. They couldn't hear what she heard. They couldn't see what she saw. "You're imagining things, Ella," her father said one night after she had woken them with her screams. "It's just the house settling. Old houses make noises." But Ella knew it wasn't the house. It was the guardian. It was always watching, always waiting. One evening, when her parents were out, the whispers reached a fever pitch. They echoed through the empty house, reverberating off the walls. Ella stood in the living room, her hands pressed to her ears, trying to block them out, but it was useless. They filled her head, a cacophony of voices chanting in unison. She felt the guardian's presence looming behind her, a dark mass of shadow and cold that seeped into her very soul. "Come," it whispered, "come to me." The basement door creaked open. She turned slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. The door yawned open, revealing the darkness beyond. It was deeper now, more inviting, as if the shadows were reaching out to embrace her. She took a step back, shaking her head, fear clawing at her throat. "No," she whispered, "I won't go." But the guardian wasn't asking, it was commanding. The room grew colder, the shadows thickening around her, closing in. The lights flickered, dimming until they went out completely. Ella was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the open basement door. It beckoned to her, the darkness within it pulsating like a living thing. She felt a pull, an unseen force dragging her toward the door. She struggled against it, her feet sliding across the floor as she fought to stay away. The whispers grew louder, the voices merging into one guttural, monstrous sound that vibrated through her bones. "Come," it roared, "come and see." With a final burst of strength, she broke free of the pull and fled to her room, slamming the door shut behind her. She curled up on her bed, her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. The house shook, the walls rattling as the guardian raged. It was furious, its anger palpable in the very air. But it couldn't reach her, not yet. The shaking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The house fell silent, the air thick with the Guardian's wrath. Ella lay there, trembling, knowing that she had only delayed the inevitable. The Guardian would not stop. It would keep coming for her, driving her to the brink until she had no choice but to descend into the basement. The dreams returned that night, more vivid than ever. Ella stood in the basement, surrounded by the ghostly figures she had seen before. They watched her with hollow eyes, their faces gaunt and twisted. The Guardian stood among them, its form towering over her. It reached out, its shadowy hand extending toward her, fingers curling around her like tendrils of darkness. "You are mine," it whispered, its voice echoing through the chamber. "You have always been mine." Ella gritó, pero no salió ningún sonido. The Guardian loomed closer, its presence suffocating. She felt herself being pulled toward it, drawn into its shadow. She struggled, fighting with every ounce of strength she had left, but it was too strong. It was everywhere, in every shadow, every whisper. Just as she was about to be consumed by the darkness, she awoke with a start, gasping for breath. The room was cold, the air heavy. She glanced around, her heart pounding in her chest. The Guardian was gone, but its presence lingered, a silent promise of what was to come. The basement door was open. Ella knew then that she couldn't avoid it any longer. The Guardian was coming for her, and it would not rest until she faced it. She had to find a way to stop it, to end its hold over the house. But deep down, she feared there was no stopping it. The Guardian had claimed this place long ago, and now it had claimed her too. The house remained silent, the calm before the storm. The Guardian was waiting, biding its time, and Ella knew that the next time it called, she would have no choice but to answer. Ella had spent the last few nights in a state of quiet dread. The Guardian was growing restless. She could feel it in the air, hear it in the shadows. The basement door, once a passive fixture in the house, now seemed to breathe, the wood creaking and shifting as if it were alive. The whispers had grown more insistent, forming coherent words that taunted her at every turn. "Come down, Ella. Come see." She could no longer ignore the pull. It was not just in her mind, it was in her bones, a magnetic force dragging her towards the basement. Her dreams were filled with images of the staircase, of the shadowy figure at the bottom, its outstretched arms ready to embrace her. But now the dream showed something else too, an old mirror buried deep within the basement, covered in grime and neglect. In her dreams, the mirror always reflected her face, but twisted and aged, as if it had stolen years from her life. Ella knew that whatever lay at the bottom of those stairs held the key to everything. The house, the Guardian, the twisted dreams. Everything led back to the basement. And so, one night, when the house was plunged into its familiar silence and her parents lay asleep, she made her decision. She was done running. The flashlight in her hand trembled as she approached the basement door. She expected it to resist her touch, to remain sealed shut as it had so many times before. But this time it swung open with an eerie ease, revealing the yawning blackness beyond. Cold air wafted up from the depths, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The whispers intensified, no longer just in her head, but filling the air around her. "Come down, Ella." Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the top stair. The wood groaned under her weight, a low, ominous sound that reverberated through the narrow space. She swallowed hard and moved downward, one step at a time, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls seemed to close in as she descended, the air growing colder, thicker, with each step. The stairs went on far longer than they should have. She knew the basement couldn't be this deep, but as she continued to descend, the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the beam of her flashlight flickering as if struggling against an unseen force. Shadows twisted around her, slithering along the walls like tendrils of smoke. Halfway down, the stairs shifted. They warped under her feet, stretching and twisting, their wooden steps becoming uneven, almost organic in shape. Ella stumbled, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the wall, but the surface felt slick and cold, like the skin of some great, unseen creature. She pulled her hand back with a shudder, her pulse quickening. The basement was no longer just a part of the house. It was something else entirely, a realm of its own that obeyed no natural laws. Finally, she reached the bottom. The ground was soft beneath her feet, the dirt shifting as if it were alive. The flashlight's beam wavered, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. In the center of the room stood the mirror, just as she had seen in her dreams. It was old, its surface clouded with grime, the frame ornate and covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Ella se acercó al espejo con cautela, sus pasos lentos y deliberados. As she drew nearer, the whispers grew louder, echoing in the confined space until they became a cacophony of voices. She could hear cries of anguish, pleas for help, voices begging for release. They swirled around her, pressing in from all sides, but her focus remained on the mirror. She had to see. She wiped a trembling hand across the glass, clearing away years of dust and filth. Her reflection stared back at her, but it was wrong. The face in the mirror was her own, but twisted, aged beyond recognition. Her eyes were hollow, her skin drawn tight over sharp bones, her hair hanging in tangled, lifeless strands. She looked like a ghost, a specter of herself, drained of life and hope. And behind her reflection, the shadows moved. The Guardian was there. It stood just behind her, its form towering and indistinct, a mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Its face was a blur, a void that sucked in the light. Ella watched in horror as it reached out, its hand stretching towards her reflection, its fingers long and clawed. "No," she whispered, stepping back. "This isn't real." But the mirror's surface rippled, the reflection changing. It showed the basement as it had once been, long ago, filled with people. They stood in a circle, their faces twisted in fear and awe, their hands raised in supplication toward the mirror. In the center of the circle stood a family, the family that had once owned the house. They chanted words Ella could not understand, their voices rising in a desperate plea. She watched as the Guardian appeared, summoned forth from the shadows. It took shape, coiling around them like a serpent, its presence a dark stain on the fabric of reality. The scene shifted, showing the aftermath. The family was gone, their faces now etched into the mirror's surface, trapped behind the glass. The Guardian stood alone in the basement, its form growing more solid, more powerful. It turned to face her, its void-like face locking onto her eyes, and Ella felt a wave of terror, so intense that it threatened to swallow her whole. "No," she gasped, stepping back again. Her foot caught on something, and she stumbled, the flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground. Darkness enveloped her, the only light coming from the dim, otherworldly glow of the mirror. She crawled backward, her hands scraping against the cold, soft earth. The Guardian moved then, detaching itself from the mirror. It flowed toward her, its form shifting and stretching, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. Ella tried to scream, but no sound came out. The Guardian loomed over her, its presence pressing down on her like a weight. She felt her limbs grow heavy, her mind foggy. It was pulling her in, drawing her into the darkness. "No," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I won't let you." In a desperate bid, she remembered the symbols, the ones etched into the mirror's frame. They were part of the ritual, the fail-safe. Her dreams had shown her more than just the summoning. They had shown her the way to bind the Guardian back to its prison. She had to act now, or it would be too late. With the last of her strength, she crawled toward the mirror, the Guardian's darkness swirling around her, trying to drag her back. She reached up, her fingers tracing the symbols, her mind racing to recall the words she had heard in her dreams. They were ancient, twisted, but they came to her in a rush, spilling from her lips in a breathless chant. The Guardian recoiled, its form rippling as if struck by an unseen force. It let out a sound, a low, guttural growl that shook the very foundation of the basement. The darkness surged, crashing against her like a wave, but she held her ground, her voice growing stronger as she repeated the chant. The symbols on the mirror began to glow, burning with an ethereal light. The Guardian howled, its form twisting and contorting as it was drawn back toward the glass. Ella felt the air grow colder, the force of the Guardian's rage battering against her mind, but she did not stop. She chanted the words again and again, each syllable a nail sealing the Guardian's fate. The Guardian's form wavered, breaking apart like smoke in the wind. It shrieked, a sound that tore through the air, filling the basement with a noise that was not of this world. It was being pulled back, drawn into the mirror. Ella watched as its shadowy limbs stretched and thinned, clawing at the air as it was dragged toward the glowing symbols. With a final, ear-splitting wail, the Guardian was sucked into the mirror, its form vanishing behind the glass. The light flared bright and then dimmed, the symbols fading until the basement was plunged into darkness once more. Ella se desplomó al suelo, jadeando por el aire, su cuerpo temblando. The whispers ceased. The air grew still. She had done it, or so she thought. As she lay there, catching her breath, the mirror began to change. Its surface rippled again, and Ella forced herself to look. Her reflection stared back at her, but now there was something different. Her own eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, mirroring the symbols on the frame. Her reflection smiled, a twisted, knowing smile. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The failsafe had worked, but not as she had hoped. The Guardian was not destroyed. It was bound again, yes, but this time it was not the basement that served as its prison. It was her. Ella se tambaleó hacia sus pies, sus piernas débiles, su corazón latiendo en su pecho. She backed away from the mirror, but her reflection remained, watching her with that same eerie smile. The darkness in the room began to recede, the basement returning to its former state, cold and still. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, inviting her to leave. Ella turned and fled, racing up the stairs, her breath ragged. She burst into the kitchen, slamming the basement door shut behind her. Her parents came running, their faces pale with concern, but she couldn't find the words to explain. How could she tell them that the Guardian was no longer in the basement, but in her? The house seemed quiet, at peace, as if it had finally been freed of its burden. But Ella knew better. She had become the Guardian's vessel, its new prison. And though she had closed the door on the basement, the true darkness was now inside her, watching and waiting. In the days that followed, the house returned to its unsettling silence. The basement door stayed shut, its whispers silenced. But at night, Ella would stand in front of her bedroom mirror, staring into her own glowing eyes, feeling the Guardian's presence coiling within her, biding its time. She had saved her family from the Guardian, but in doing so had become the very thing she feared. And deep in her mind, she could hear the Guardian's voice, whispering to her from the shadows of her own soul. "You are mine, Ella. You have always been mine." The days stretched on in a haunting quiet. The house on Elm Street had seemingly returned to normal, its oppressive aura dissipated, the whispers silenced. To anyone on the outside, the ordeal appeared over. Ella's parents believed the darkness had been banished, though they never spoke of what exactly happened in the basement. They only knew that Ella had changed, Her eyes, once filled with youthful curiosity, now bore the weight of something far beyond her years. But Ella knew the truth. The Guardian was still with her, lurking just beneath the surface, a shadow within her soul. It watched, it waited, its whispers a constant murmur at the edge of her mind. She was the vessel now, the one who kept the darkness at bay. Every day was a struggle to maintain control, to keep the Guardian caged inside her. She avoided mirrors, fearing what she might see in their depths. Her parents made plans to leave the house. They spoke of fresh starts, of new places, of putting the horrors of Elm Street behind them. And for a while, Ella let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could escape. Perhaps distance could weaken the Guardian's hold. Perhaps in a new place she could find some semblance of peace. The night before they were set to leave, Ella sat in her room, staring at the packed boxes around her. Midnight, her cat lay curled up on the bed, its eyes half closed, a silent sentinel in the creeping darkness. Midnight had always been wary of the basement, but since that night he had not left Ella's side. He watched her with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. She reached out to stroke his fur, feeling a surge of warmth in the otherwise cold room. "We'll be all right," she whispered, more to herself than to Midnight. "We're leaving this place. We're leaving it all behind." Midnight's eyes flickered, reflecting the dim light of the bedside lamp. For a moment, she thought she saw a glimmer of something else in those eyes. A warning, a knowing look that sent a chill down her spine. She pulled her hand back, unease settling in her stomach. Ella se acostó, la fatiga de las semanas pasadas pesando pesadamente sobre ella. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, to find some escape from the relentless whispers. But sleep eluded her, the darkness behind her eyelids, swirling with shapes and shadows. The Guardian stirred within her, restless, agitated by their impending departure. As the night deepened, the house grew silent. Not the silence of peace, but the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, that made your heartbeat echo loudly in your chest. Midnight stood suddenly, his back arching, fur bristling. He hissed, his gaze fixed on the corner of the room. Ella's eyes flew open, her body tensing. "What is it, Midnight?" she whispered, though she already knew. The shadows in the corner shifted, coiling like smoke. Ella sat up slowly, her breath hitching in her throat. She felt it then, the Guardian, rising within her, a surge of cold that washed over her, turning her blood to ice. It was pushing, pressing against the edges of her mind, testing the boundaries she had fought so hard to maintain. "No," she gasped, clutching her head. "Not now. Not here." The darkness swirled, and for a heartbeat, she saw it. A form in the corner, tall and gaunt, its face still a blur, its eyes hollow voids that bore into her soul. Midnight leapt off the bed, placing himself between Ella and the encroaching darkness, his fur standing on end, a low growl emanating from deep within him. The Guardian pushed harder, its voice hissing in her mind. "You cannot leave, Ella. You are mine." Ella clutched her head, feeling the walls of her mind cracking under the pressure. It was stronger than before, more desperate. Leaving the house had made it frantic, made it fight to hold on. She fell to the floor, her hands clawing at the carpet as she struggled to contain it. Midnight moved closer, his body tense, his eyes glowing in the dim light. He hissed again, louder this time, a feral sound that echoed through the room. And then, to Ella's horror, he moved toward the corner, toward the shifting shadow. "No, Midnight!" she screamed, reaching out, but her body was too heavy, too numb. She could only watch as her cat approached the darkness, his back arching, his tail puffed out. The Guardian recoiled for a moment, as if repelled by Midnight's defiance. Ella felt a surge of hope. The Guardian feared Midnight. He was more than just a pet. He was a protector, a barrier between her and the encroaching darkness. For a moment, the Guardian's hold on her mind loosened, the whispers faltering. Midnight took another step toward the shadow, his eyes locked onto the Guardian's form. He hissed again, and the air around them grew cold, the light in the room dimming. Ella felt the Guardian's rage, a tidal wave of fury crashing against her mind. It was being pushed back, forced to retreat. Then, in a move that made Ella's heart lurch, Midnight turned his gaze to her. There was a depth in his eyes, a solemn understanding that made her breath catch. He took one final step into the darkness, his body becoming a silhouette against the twisting shadows. And then, with a flash of blinding light, he leaped into the void. The room exploded in a cacophony of sound. Shadows writhed and twisted, the Guardian's scream a piercing shriek that reverberated through the walls. Ella watched, helpless, as the darkness closed in around Midnight, swallowing him whole. The light flared again, brighter this time, forcing her to shield her eyes. And then, silence. The shadows dissipated, the room returning to its normal state. Ella blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden stillness. Midnight was gone. The Guardian was gone. The corner of the room was empty, devoid of any trace of the battle that had just taken place. Ella se arrastró hacia la esquina, su pecho jadeando con sollozos. She reached out, her hands grasping at the air, at the nothingness that had taken her only friend. "No," she choked out. "No! No! No!" She collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with grief. Midnight had sacrificed himself. He had thrown himself into the darkness to save her, to seal the Guardian back into its prison. The realization crushed her, a weight so heavy that she thought she might be suffocated by it. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Ella lay there, her sobs quieting into a hollow silence. The room was still. The house was still. For the first time since they had moved in, the air felt lighter. The oppressive presence lifted. She felt the Guardian's absence, a void where its darkness had once been. It was gone, truly gone. But as she lay there, a new fear began to creep in. The house was silent, yes, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of waiting. The next morning, her parents found her curled up in the corner, clutching Midnight's collar in her hands. They tried to comfort her, their voices a blur in the haze of her grief. She was led out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house, her feet moving mechanically. They loaded the car, their faces tight with concern, but relieved to be leaving the house behind. As they drove away, Ella turned to look at the house one last time. It stood there, a dark silhouette against the morning sky, its windows staring back at her like empty eyes. And in the upper window, her bedroom window, she saw it, a reflection. Not her own, but the twisted, aged version of herself. It watched her, its eyes glowing faintly, a smile curving its lips. A chill ran down her spine as the reflection lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Ella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned away, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The Guardian was gone from the house, but not from her. Midnight's sacrifice had sealed it away, but not in the basement, not in the house. It was in her. She stared out the window, the landscape blurring as they drove away. The whispers were gone, but she knew they would return. The Guardian was bound to her now, its darkness a part of her. She had escaped the house, but the haunting was far from over. And as they left Elm Street behind, Ella closed her eyes, feeling the darkness stir within her, silent but alive. The Guardian had not been defeated. It had only changed form, a shadow now entwined with her own. "You are mine, Ella," it whispered, a faint echo in the depths of her mind. "You have always been mine." The car sped down the road, carrying them toward their new life, but Ella knew there would be no escape. The Guardian was with her, part of her, and it would follow her wherever she went. The house on Elm Street had claimed her, and though they were miles away, its presence lingered. She was the new Guardian now, a vessel of the darkness that had haunted that place for generations. Ella se inclinó hacia atrás en su asiento, sus ojos fijos en el horizonte. She would fight it. She had to. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was just the beginning. The real horror was not in the house, but in the knowledge that some things, once awakened, could never be truly laid to rest.